Hello and welcome to this All Indians Matter in-depth limited series, Gandhi The Beginning. I'm Ashraf Engineer. September 4, 1888. There's the usual pandemonium on the SS Clyde as it weighs anchor at 5 pm in Bombay and sets sail for England. Mohandas Gandhi leans against the rail, eyes fixed on the land as it grows more and more distant and finally disappears. He turns around and retires to his cabin, his mind home to 100 conflicting emotions. Overcome by acute embarrassment because he cannot handle a knife and fork properly and because he isn't as fluent in English as he'd like to be, Mohan withdraws to his cabin, eating alone there for days and not even coming out for tea. He emerges from his shell only when a fellow passenger, Trimbakrai Mazmudar, arranges for the crew to make them both vegetarian meals. For Mohan, the voyage is like being in Wonderland. The unending expanse of the ocean, the smartly uniformed crew, the music, the games, the moonlit water. On the way, Mohan alights briefly at Aden, passes through the Suez Canal, takes in Port Said and Brindisi, as well as Malta and Gibraltar. Finally, the SS Clyde reaches Plymouth and 24 hours later, Southampton. It is October 27, 1888. Mohandas's stay in England would have a profound effect on his life as well as his family's. To talk us through it, we have again Tushar Gandhi, great-grandson of the Mahatma and author and peace activist. This is the third part of the series, Gandhi The Beginning. Tushar, welcome.
Thank you, Ashraf.
Tushar, Gandhi faced problems and embarrassment the moment, quite literally, he alighted from the SS Clyde. What were they?
Actually, he faced a very embarrassment on the very first day of the cruise when he goes onto the deck. Now, he has spent the monsoon period in Bombay preparing for his sojourn abroad. And like a country bumpkin, he's gone and got himself the flashiest of clothes possible, not understanding the British etiquette of different attire for different times of the day and things. And so on the very first day, he boards the ship wearing, at that time, considered inappropriate, white, broad lapelled suit, which is like a lounge suit, which he's wearing as a day suit. And he sees all over that everybody is wearing the casual British gentlemanly attire, and he's wearing the flashy clothes, and everybody is looking and saying, who's this guy wearing such clothes like a joker? And so he immediately rushes to his cabin and locks himself up. He says, my God, I don't have the appropriate clothes. What am I going to do? So for a long time on the cruise, he only comes out of his rooms at night to loiter on the deck when nobody is there to see him because he's embarrassed by what he's saying till Trimbakeshwar. So the fact is that he realized that he was committing follies right on the day one of embarking. He's got white leather shoes and everybody laughs when he goes onto deck wearing those kind of thing. And then, like a sensitive guy, anybody cracking a joke, anybody laughing, he thinks they're all cracking a joke at his expense or laughing in ridicule of him, and not realizing that they could be doing that in their conversations, in their private conversations also. So he's become hypersensitive. By the time he lands in London, he's very conscious of the whole thing. And the one thing he has convinced himself is he's got to become the proper gentleman. He must not look ridiculous. He must not do. And so for the first 6 months of his stay in London, he's just attempting to become the proper gentleman and conforming to all the requirements to what he considers being the proper gentleman.
Yeah, as Pyarelal ji puts it, he wanted to become more English than an Englishman. And what does that mean? And what was the result of it?
Yeah, the top hat, the demand that I need to buy a top hat, I don't have a top hat. Then the demand that I need to buy a cane because all the young men walk with a cane in their hand and things. And then enrolling for violin lessons and ballroom dancing and all that. Now, he enrolls for a ballroom dancing class and then he realizes, he has to hold a madam in his arms. So in some way he's violating the promise
Wow, yeah.
made. And so there's that dilemma that's happening also, what to do and what not. And from day one, the difficulty of food, because there's no vegetarian food available. For a long time, he's just existing on bread and butter.
His vegetarianism proved to be a problem throughout, didn't it? And he also joined the Vegetarian Society, I believe,
Yeah.
or it was called the English Vegetarian Movement. I mean, what was all this about?
See, there was a infantile movement happening all over Europe and in England, where people were consciously turning towards vegetarianism for spiritual reasons, for health reasons, for various reasons. But they were all considered to be eccentrics. People would say, these are, abhi jo, we have this thing, there'll be anybody who is a bit different than us is called a deviant. So in that time, the rest of the society also frowned on them. But it was accidental. He had resigned himself to the fact that he was going to eat bread for the time that he was there in England. And then one day, at one point of time, he realizes that he is taxing his family too much for all his fads, because he's sent for money from his family to buy a gold chain for his fob watch, because everybody in those days fashionably wears a gold chain on their coat, kind of thing. And for everything he keeps sending for money, and then he realizes that this is not right. So the first thing he does is, I'm not going to use transport, I'm going to save on that. He starts walking everywhere, to his college, back, and wherever he goes walking. And one of his walking trips, he discovers this small little establishment which says Vegetarian Movement of England Restaurant. There's a name for it. I believe it still exists in London. This time when I went there, I tried to look for it, but the surroundings have changed so much that unless there is somebody who knows the exact location, it's very difficult to find. But I found the locality where it was. And so he starts frequenting that place, and he subscribes to the publication they have. And then slowly he starts becoming comfortable and becoming a regular in their talks and all that. And then because it's all Europeans, and this is the first Asian, he's invited to speak at one of their gatherings. And he's very timid. He's very conscious about his wrong accent and all that. So he prepares a speech, but then he can't develop the courage enough to stand up and read. So he hands it over to his host and says, please read it out for me. And so his speech is read out. But then he becomes a very passionate member of the movement. And he is credited for designing their logo.
Oh, is it?
The Vegetarian Society. When it turns into the Vegetarian Society, he designed the logo of the shield that they go by. So this is how he's slowly breaking out of his shy mold. He's had experiences where he is staying with landladies, and many experiences of that time also, where one of them wants to turn him into a son-in-law for his daughter, her daughter.
I think it was a protege, it wasn't the daughter.
Yeah, some places it's mentioned as the daughter, sometimes as the protege, and that lady would keep pushing the two together, and they started going for walks and things, and they would have talks, and slowly Mohan started being attracted towards her. And then finally, when it would have moved into the next level of relationship, he remembers the promise he's made, and he leaves the apartment, leaving behind a letter explaining his inability of continuing with that relationship and things. So there are lots of experiences. One of the amusing experiences that he writes about is the inner temple, where he is enrolled to become a lawyer, has a tradition that on Thursdays at dinner, all the fellows of they're not called students of the Inner Temple because it's not a college, but it's an inn, a law inn. And so they're all fellows of the inn. Have a ceremonial dinner, and the fellows are all given a bottle of wine to consume with their dinner, at a formal dinner. And on Thursday evenings at dinner time, Mohandas Gandhi was the most popular of the fellows because everybody found out that he doesn't drink his wine, and so whoever shares his table can commandeer that bottle of wine. So they used to queue up to sit on Mohan. It wasn't because he was very lively company, he was the most boring company. But the bottle of wine was very attractive.
So how did Mohan finally get comfortable in his own skin in England?
Finally, he realized his priorities and he started concentrating on his studies. And then he realized that a necessary partner to the study of law was a study of Latin as a language. And so he enrolls in the university to take a course in Latin also, because he realizes that all the laws are written in the original Latin. And so if he is fluent in Latin, then he can read and interpret the laws better in their original form rather than in their translated forms. And so he starts strategizing for his career. He starts coming in contact with other Asian students. It's very surprising that two people who had the greatest influence on this subcontinent came from the same region of India and came from neighboring inns of law in London, where Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Mohandas Gandhi were both born and brought up in Kathiawad. Both went to England to become lawyers. Mohandas Gandhi was a fellow of the Inner Temple, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the fellow of the neighboring college or inn of law in the same campus. I went and visited Inner Temple, and I saw they were both facing each other, kind of thing. And so I imagined, although Muhammad Ali Jinnah was junior
would have been much junior actually, yeah,
to Bapu, I imagined because there's a beautiful garden in that campus, and I was told that it was a popular hangout of the students because that was the only area where they could get their dates to come. And so it would be overflowing with couples in the evening. And I imagined Mohan and Jinnah looking across from each other, although it never happened, but in my imagination. And then, of course, very surprisingly, Savarkar also was a product of the British education system. He was also studying in London at that time. So London was a hotspot of Indian intellectuals and young people who were being influenced by the European anarchists and communists and socialists and all of them.
So, Tushar, what was England like at that time?
Well, Victorian England, Bohemian, even very feudal, very class conscious, with the structured society kind of thing, the prejudices against social castes over there. The caste system in India was what Mohan was brought up with, but he witnessed the social stratification in London between the working class and the privileged and the elite and the mercantile people, and how each one of them frowned on each other. I'm sure at some point of time he might have been amused when the British typically ridiculed the caste system in India, and he was witnessing the non-formal caste system existence in the English society. So he witnessed all those things. He witnessed the effects of the Industrial Revolution and the murmuring of discontent leading up to the wars and all that. Although it was much earlier, but the murmurings were there. Europe was in ferment. Many of the royal dynasties were reaching the level of becoming extremely unpopular and all that.
This would have been about 20-25 years before World War I, roughly. So, Tushar, from the day that he sailed into England to the day that he started making his way back after passing the bar exam on June 12, 1891, how would you say Mohan had changed?
I think not. There wasn't a spectacular change, but there was a maturity that came. The lad who landed in London, the country bumpkin who was very conscious of his being a misfit in the society, who was very perturbed about it, who was very, he was very anxious to conform with the society. The person who was going back was much more confident. The person who was going back was much more sure of himself. But his greatest desire was to reach home and go and tell his mother that he had honestly lived up to the promises he had made to her. That more than, flashing his degree, it was for him what was necessary was going to his mother and saying, "Mom, I did not violate any of the promises I made to you."
So that brings me to another very, very important inflection point in his life. Mohan was upbeat when he alighted in Mumbai, or Bombay as it was called then, and he was met by his brother Lakshmi Das. What news did he get that shattered his world?
You see, what had happened was that just a few weeks before Mohan was to write his exam, a month or so before he was to write his final exams, Putliba suddenly took ill and after a brief illness passed away. The family was in dilemma and whether to inform Mohan or not. And Kastur intervened and she said, if he finds out that Ba is no more, he'll throw away everything and rush back home. And then we'll not be able to send him back. So she prevails on the family saying, we will not tell him about it. And Lakshmi Das, who goes to pick him up, receive him at Bombay. When Mohan sees him, he sees that his brother looks very grief-stricken and disturbed. And he's bubbling with enthusiasm. When are we reaching Rajkot? What are we doing? And things. And then Lakshmi Das tells him, Ba is no more. Putliba is no more. And Mohan's world comes crashing because the one thing he wanted to do, go and tell his mother, I lived up to the promise I made. He's never going to be able to do that. And that is the time when Lakshmi Das also tells him that mother's last wish was that you make peace with the community. You apologize to the community leaders and atone for your mistakes. And Mohan on his own would not have done it. But he does it as a fulfillment of his mother's last wish. And he says, okay, whatever the rituals. But he says, I will ask forgiveness from the community, but I will also inform them that if another opportunity comes, I will go back. I'm not going to promise them that I will never break the custom. So they go from Bombay, they go directly to Nasik, they do all the last rites for the mother. They also do the purification rituals for Mohan. And then they go to Rajkot and he seeks the community's pardon.
So he actually did seek the pardon, and
he had to, because otherwise that would never have happened. But he also tells them that this doesn't mean that I'm going to obey your diktats forever. If again I have the opportunity, I'll go. But by then, the community also has to soften, because more and more of its people are going abroad and they can't afford to keep excommunicating everybody. And so those very strict norms are also breaking down.
Now, Tushar, the country boy, the boy from Porbandar and Rajkot who has gone to England, has come back as something of a brown sahib.
Yes.
And when he gets home, he seems to have imposed so called reforms on his family members and especially his wife.
Yeah.
So, what was the nature of that?
So the first thing he does is they invest in a dining table and chairs, and he says, henceforth we are not going to eat like savages sitting on the floor. Dinner will be served on the dining table, and everybody will sit on the chairs. And it was very funny, that he imposed a time for dinner for everybody, and most of the children would make an excuse to be able to sit on the floor and eat. And most of the adults, many of the adults would make a excuse of being busy at that time and say, okay, we won't sit for dinner when Mohan is there, and when he's not there, we'll sit in our conventional way and eat, kind of thing. But Kastur was one who could not escape. So all these strict adherences were made for her and Mohan's children, the two sons that they had by now. So she bore the brunt. He imposed a rule of wearing shoes. So he went and bought footwear for everybody. And to make them walk properly with footwear, they were made to practice with it the whole day. And Kasturba, that was one of the biggest grouse she had, that uncomfortable English footwear that she had to wear. And at every given opportunity, she would just kick them off. And then Mohan would say, go wear your shoes, you're not walking barefoot like a savage, kind of thing. And made her start wearing clothes. Ba refused to wear dresses and things, so he started making her dress up like a Parsi woman. So, those long sleeve blouses with frills and all that and things. So he was trying to consciously westernize the family also.
So, while he imposes all of these things, he isn't making much headway on the work front.
And Kastur chides him about it.
Oh, she does?
Yeah, she does. My father, in his biography of Ba, has written about it, and she chides him about it and says, okay, this is all nice, but you were sent there to become a barrister so that you would come here and practice as a barrister. When are you going to do that? The family has a lot of debt to pay back. And so finally, Mohandas Gandhi decides, and he's once again counseled by his father's friend, on whose advice he had gone to England to study. He comes and tells him, look, Rajkot is not going to give you enough practice to sustain a lifestyle. You have to go to Bombay, and you have to become a lawyer there, because that is where you will get the lucrative practice from. And so finally, Mohandas Gandhi leaves Rajkot and he comes to Bombay. He hires an office, he finds an accommodation in Girgaon and starts living there and starts his practice as M.K. Gandhi, attorney at law.
I believe you recently, or at least not too long ago, found that building.
Yes, I was very keen because I found a correspondence that he had with one of his financiers and patrons in Rajkot. I visited their home and they had the correspondence between Bapu and their ancestor. And it was on the letterhead of M.K. Gandhi, attorney at law. And in that I found the address. So I said, let me, because it was supposed to be across from the High Court. So I said, that area hasn't changed. It's heritage precinct, so maybe the building still exists. And I started looking for it from that. When I looked up in Google Maps, it sort of showed that the building I was looking for was in Masgon. And I said, it can't be, High Court was never in Masgon, it was in Fort. So it was very strange, I am a member of a Facebook group called Old Bombay. So I put up a query saying, I've got this address of this building. I want to know where it is located today, present day. And I said, maybe somebody will know. Within 5 minutes, I got the Google location, I got the present day where the building is and all that. Now the only question remaining is to find the actual office. Maybe one day I'll just go around asking in that building. I don't think anybody would remember, but maybe the building hasn't changed internally and at least a rough location of it could be found.
With that, we come to the end of the third part of this series, Gandhi The Beginning. Tushar, as always, thanks so much for being part of it.
Thank you, Ashraf. Thank you. It was so nice recalling all the episodes and stories and things.
We continue the story in the fourth part, in which the story moves to South Africa. If you liked what you heard, please follow this podcast and share this episode with your friends and family.